Supreme Court, I believe that was mentioned in the last segment, so we can go ahead and use it here for our transition. A lot going on at the Supreme Court. Top line, what is happening is that the vaccine or test mandate looks extremely in danger after oral arguments before the Supreme Court. But we'll start with a very interesting moment. Justice Sonia Sotomayor making a claim that there are hundreds of thousands of kids on ventilators. We have audio, not video, because the Supreme Court doesn't allow that. Let's take a listen.
Country today than we had a year ago in January. We have hospitals that are almost at full capacity with people severely ill on ventilators. We have over 100,000 children, which we've never had before, in serious condition, and many on ventilators. So saying it's a different variant just underscores the fact that
Okay, that was so egregious. Even the Washington Post and others, PolitiFact, some of the most left-leaning fact checkers out there, had to come out and be like, whoa, hold on a second. There are not over 100,000 children who are in the hospital. Let's go ahead and put that up on the screen. Sotomayor's false claim, they gave her 4 Pinocchios for the over 100K number for serious condition. Also, there was another rumor floating around that Justice Gorsuch had said that hundreds of thousands of people died of the flu. He actually said hundreds, thousands of people every year, just to clear that up for anybody who's been following this online. Look, the actual number of children who are in the hospital on this is actually pretty difficult in order to ascertain, largely because of like HIPAA, obviously, state-by-state data. As of January 8th, there are about 5,000. So look, that was 2 days ago. That was HHS data. It, generally tracks, but if you compare that to the number of kids, obviously, who have gotten it, and then even whenever we continue to see that a huge number of these cases, especially kids who are in the hospital, are with COVID. You come in with a broken leg, you test positive, and you're technically qualified. So keep that in mind. But it is off by a factor of 20 when we're talking about the justice. I think there's a lot to be said here, which is that think about the type of media that she has to consume in order to believe that is true.
Yes.
That means that's a systemic failure. That's not just on her. That is on a whole architecture of psychotic, media obsession on this. I'm doing my whole monologue on the CDC's own role, but that's a major indictment of the elite class in this country.
I totally agree. I did a monologue last week, as you know, based on a New York Times article by David Leonhardt. Just laying out the data, which is very clear about the way kids have been hurt by school shutdowns and the comparatively low risk that kids are at when it comes to coronavirus, and especially when it comes to Omicron. Boy, were people upset.
Yeah, I was surprised by that.
I guess to me, the data is so straightforward. I'm not saying that there's zero risk to kids, but compared to other risks like the flu and pneumonia, compared to just the risk of driving in the car to the school place, you are at much lower risk. And we know it very clear the way that kids' academic achievement, the way that their mental health has suffered, the way behavioral problems have spiked, the way suicide has increased. So we have very clear data on the way that closing schools hurt kids, and actually no clear data on closing schools helping kids. It's not even clear that it did reduce their risk to Omicron ultimately. But you can see when you have someone who is as knowledgeable as Justice Sotomayor has to be, with such a skewed perception, I mean, just wildly off about the risks that are facing kids, then I understand how you would view what I was saying. It's like, my God, how can you put our children at risk like this? Jesus Christ, you're a mother. Because there are a lot of people who have consumed media that, because of the overwhelming emphasis and the inflation of the risk to children, don't actually understand the sort of comparative risk level of these sorts of policies. So that's why it really, really matters ultimately a lot, and is very telling that she could be off by a factor of 20 on such an important, I mean, what could be a more important metric than the risk level that is facing our children right now.
Right, and then just to bring it to the substance, which is also very important, is this mandate does look like it's going down for the general population. So let's go ahead and put that up there on the screen from the New Yorker. Vaccine mandates have a bad day at the Supreme Court. Let me try and explain it best that I can. So the conservative majority in their questioning, what they were hinting at is that if Congress were to give OSHA the ability, the OSHA agency the ability to implement a vaccine mandate, they would have written vaccine mandate specifically within the charter of OSHA. Now, this conflicts with the general, more liberal view of the court, and I don't mean that pejoratively. I'm just saying in terms of how it is looked at through administrative law, that OSHA, via its ability and its mandate to keep people safe, can then go ahead and try and mandate vaccination. This doesn't even necessarily matter whenever it comes to the science. And I know that sounds ridiculous, but law doesn't really work that way. But from the Supreme Court kind of more textualist conservative view, what they're saying is that OSHA doesn't have that ability because Congress never specifically enumerated them with that ability of the within the law. Thus, and this is what Justice Gorsuch and others were saying, is it is very clear that this OSHA mandate was used as a workaround of Congress, and that because of the inability of Congress to function, that the Biden administration was using administrative law to circumvent the democratic process and implement it. Actually, somewhat sympathetic to that, and we could even talk about it from a more scientific point of view, why I don't even, especially with Omicron, I don't think it makes any sense, but that is kind of a decent summary of it. Now, from the liberal point of view, Kagan, Sotomayor, Breyer, and others appeared to be more in line with what I was saying about the interpretation of the actual abilities that Congress has given OSHA, and we're looking at it from that way, especially given what they looked at as the severity of the virus. But given the 6.3, it doesn't look like this is going to stand.
So basically, and this is why this is relevant not just for this particular vaccine and test mandate, but more broadly for how the court approaches their role versus the role of these agencies, is Congress actually granted OSHA very broad authority. The OSH Act of 1970, Occupational Safety and Health Act of 1970, permits OSHA to issue binding rules that provide, quote, medical criteria which will assure, insofar as practicable, that no employee will suffer diminished health, functional capacity, or life expectancy as a result of his work experience. So that is a very broad granting of authority, and basically you're saying to OSHA, and you can interpret that, however you see fit in order to protect workers. What the court is effectively saying here is that they are uncomfortable with a federal agency being granted such sweeping powers, and that they believe the law should more specifically enumerate what powers agencies are ultimately given. So that has potential ramifications, not just in this case, but in a lot of other cases where the power of a federal agency is ultimately questioned. So on the more broader vaccine or test mandate for the public, I mean, every analyst that I read said it's going down.
Yeah, that's right.
It looks very likely to go down. And I think to your point, Wall Street Journal raised this, which is an interesting point that maybe I have some issues with. But they said, look, actually with Omicron, there isn't a lot of evidence that being vaccinated stops the incident of illness. Now, look, you are much less likely to be hospitalized and much less likely to die if you are vaccinated. But in terms of stopping the spread, with Omicron, it doesn't actually seem like there's not evidence to say that the vaccines are effective. We don't have the science to say that yet. But putting that aside, so on the broader public question, it looks likely that is going to be struck down. On a more narrow question of health facilities that receive Medicare and Medicaid funds, they seem more likely to uphold that one, because in that instance, the federal government is basically saying, look, you got to play by our rules or we're pulling our funding. Roberts and others seemed more likely to agree ultimately to that more narrow instance.
Yeah, I actually do think it makes sense, right? Which is that we do have very specific case law around what it means in order to work in a medical establishment. Now, once again, whether you disagree or not as to whether that should be implemented, from a legal perspective, that has a much more narrow kind of focus with a lot of different regulations in the way that we have it right now, especially in the way that the state has it. But whenever it comes to a private workplace, especially over 100 workers, that is a whole other can of worms. It also is indicative of much more meta levels, like you were saying, around how the conservative majority is going to be looking at specific laws. And this goes to the Federalist Society and a lot of the specific legal doctrine that these guys subscribe to that is now within the court. So it's good to try and familiarize yourself with it here if you do care about some of these big cases that are happening. That's kind of the best summary that you'll see. It's almost certainly not going to stand, even though I believe it is still kind of going into effect with the appellate court. So it's a bit of a chaotic situation, and we'll keep everybody updated.
Yeah, and the last thing I'll say is it is somewhat of a break with precedent because there have been previous vaccine mandates at the local that were even more stringent that didn't even have the testing out that were ultimately upheld. So obviously this vaccine mandate is supposed to go into effect today.
Yeah.
And they have not decided to sort of block the rule from being implemented as of today, but it looks very likely to ultimately be struck down with broader implications for how they orient themselves with regards to the federal agencies.
That's right.
Hey guys, thanks so much for watching.
That's right. Just as a reminder, you can become a premium subscriber today. Watch the full show completely uncut, our reactions to each other's monologues. You get to listen to it. You get to ask us questions, all that good stuff. Link is right there in the description or at breakingpoints.com.
Best of all, great way to say screw you to the mainstream media.